Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is September 25th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update, and we are going to be asking ourselves, have things actually just gotten significantly worse for Russia? Let's break it down. Okay, first off, the minor news is that Russia continues to make seemingly meaningless advances over territory that has really no strategic value, right? As you can see here, this area of some reservoirs and farmland they've seized. Hooray! Brings them closer to their critical target of Bivnichi, right? But this is, of course, emblematic of how the Russians have been fighting lately, and is probably reflective of those Russian units that have been contracted and are rewarded based on territory seized. And so it would make sense that they would seek out then, based on that set of incentives, they would find areas of the front, areas of the line of contact where there is almost no strategic value, but they can make significant advances. And this is exactly illustrative of that, right? They've become slightly closer to a cluster of villages that, sort of connect to a small roadway, but this is in no way reflective of the actual strategic objective of the Russians, or operational objective, of Bakhmut. Why then would they devote combat power to seizing territory not near their strategic objectives? Your guess is as good as anyone's. But again, I think this reflects the fact that Russia has instituted so many convoluted methods to recruiting and fielding troops that the result is that it's hard to maintain command and control in a single strategy. But now let's talk about what I think is the more significant news. Now, obviously, we talked yesterday about the fact that Ukrainian forces are continuing to push, continuing to peel away the Russians from the Oxyl River and reservoir, right? Separating them from their most important geographic defensive boundary, which is, of course, this reservoir and river. That's the thing that basically stopped the Ukrainian offensive, not so much Russian combat power, but literally a river. And so that's why when we zoom in here, right next to the town of Dvorichna, you can see that the fact that Ukrainian forces have seized Hirankiva and Horobivka. Why are these so significant? Well, they're significant because it means that the Ukrainians have actually effected a bridge crossing here at Dvorichna. And we are now officially taking territory on the eastern side of the river. This is a tremendous problem because, as you can see, it actually splits Russian forces in a way that's going to potentially be very problematic for them. You can see here, right, there's still also this contested region outside of Kupiansk, but we haven't really seen this turn into a meaningful bridgehead. But now we can say that along the line of contact, right, at least two bridges, at least two crossing points are now owned firmly by Ukrainian forces. This is a huge problem for Russia. Again, as you can see, what was originally an important geographic boundary now has lots and lots of holes. There's one in the south here, right? One along the midpoint of the line of contact, and now another bridgehead across the river up here. All of these are going to probably serve to try to peel the Russians away. It's possible, though I think sort of unlikely, that you might see Ukrainian forces attempt to flank in this direction, right? Trap Russian forces and force them to withdraw into Russia. That's possible, but sort of unlikely. I think it's more likely that you'll see these forces both expand out, try to form a single bridgehead here, or that they will simply try to lock this bridgehead in place and try to push south, allowing these forces to continue to peel the Russians back from the Oxyl River. In any case, if the more of these bridges that the Ukrainians can seize, the less significant this river is going to be in terms of deciding the line of contact, right? Russia has probably been putting a lot of its combat power here in an effort to stabilize this front line. It hasn't really been working. Now they need to pour combat power into these two spots in order to stop these small bridgeheads from becoming larger breakthroughs into the Russian backfield. Again, as we've seen, the Russian backfield is really not prepared for defense in depth. They're not prepared to assume defensive positions, especially through this newly created line of contact, right? For, again, large portions of the war, these areas were considered basically non-combat zones. Now suddenly they've become frontline areas, and they're probably not situated yet to have, for example, secondary or ancillary trenches or fields of fire, designated target reference points, right? All the things that you would need to make a good defensive position if your initial one, your primary ones, get overwhelmed. So all in all, this is just bad news for Ukraine. And to make bad news even worse, the rumor is that, now I actually think there's a chance this is just Russian propaganda. The rumor now is that Russian Defense Minister Shoigu's declaration about the military mobilization order doesn't actually reflect Putin's intention or orders. This is a really common tactic we've discussed for authoritarian leaders who have to explain to their population why unpopular policies are being enacted, and why, despite being a powerful, intelligent leader, according to their own propaganda, that there's still corruption and endemic abuse of the system. And usually a last resort is to claim that actually the leader is not aware of what's happening and is instead being manipulated by those around him, by the corruption of the institution. And surely if compassionate Vladimir Putin knew of the abuse of the conscript system, he would never stand for it. But again, this is a propaganda technique. It's not actual reality. There's almost no way that Putin did not communicate, either implicitly or explicitly, that warm bodies had to get in uniforms fast. And that seems to be the guidance that Russian draft commissars have implemented. There's also rumors that Russia is deliberately targeting rural areas where support for the war is higher, and there's frankly a lot less media to document what's going on, right? So they don't want to be mobilizing a lot of people in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and instead want to do it in much more rural regions. Also, rumors that Putin is continuing his the reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, as they say, cycling people through different leadership positions, replacing ministers of logistics, army generals, Russian National Defense Control Center, just trying their best to try to shuffle through and find someone who can effectively prosecute this war, on the belief, right, on Putin's belief, perhaps, that this is caused by individual incompetence and not by systematic failures, that even if you could dig Napoleon out of his grave and put him in charge of this, would still have absolutely no idea how to even take control of the situation. As we've discussed, I'm not convinced the Russian Ministry of Defense has a ton of control over these forces at this point. Also, of course, rumors that Russia's trying to forcibly mobilize Ukrainian prisoners of war to fight for Russia, which is a massive Geneva Convention violation that we've talked about before. You can't force people to fight against their own friends, right? Their own countrymen. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you for today. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, first off, check out the Patreon, right? You may have noticed YouTube has been cracking down on combat videos, combat content, sometimes unfairly, I think, but if you want unfiltered, uncensored, exclusive combat video breakdowns, just become a member of the Patreon. The link is in the description, and of course, thank you to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys make this possible. I'll see you guys in the next one.